OK, it's Monday. On Monday, September 3, 1939, Australia's new Prime Minister, Robert Menzies, announced to a nervous nation, and I quote, "It is my melancholy duty to inform you officially that in consequence of a persistence by Germany in her invasion of Poland, Great Britain has declared war upon her, and that as a result, Australia is also at war." It is interesting to note, in the light of the rank abuse of the democratic process at work in Australia today, think of the freedoms being denied us, think of the dictatorial behaviour of governments, think of the anarchy in the streets. An editorial on that day argued, and I quote, "We are fighting to defend democracy on distant fronts. We must not, in the process, lose it at home." Well, the war did end. Germany had surrendered in Europe in May, and the American President Truman pleaded with Japan to surrender. America had ended the war following the horrific attack by Japan on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Japan believed that once the US Pacific Fleet was neutralised, all of Southeast Asia would be open for conquest. So in many ways, it was a war on two fronts, Germany in Europe, Japan in the Pacific. Franklin D. Roosevelt died in April 1945. Harry Truman became president. Fewer than 30 minutes after Truman took the oath of office, he was informed that a super bomb was almost ready. Stunned by Roosevelt's death, Truman didn't take much notice, or he didn't sort of take it in. 2 weeks later, he was advised by the Secretary of War, Harry Stimson, that, quote, "Within months, the most terrible weapon ever known in human history will be ready." Now, as I said, Truman had pleaded with Japan to surrender. Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe and Truman's successor as president, thought detonating the atomic bomb was a mistake. He argued, and I quote, "Japan's already defeated and seeking some way to surrender with a minimum loss of face." Well, Truman doubted that Japan would end hostilities. Truman said the Japanese were self-proclaimed fanatic warriors who made it all too clear they preferred death to defeat in battle. The decision to use the atomic bomb was Truman's alone. It was detonated first on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and days later on Nagasaki on August 9. The second bomb signalled that America would go on until Japan yielded. The surrender was announced on August 15, 75 years ago this Saturday. The former leader of the Liberal Party, another outstanding Australian knifed by Malcolm Turnbull, subsequently a magnificent, scholarly and informed head of our war memorial, Dr Brendan Nelson, has kindly agreed to share his perspective on this, and he's with us in one of our Sydney studios. Brendan, thank you for your time. How significant was August 15, 1945?
Well, Alan, it's one of the most significant dates in Australia's history, and as you referred to in your introductory remarks there, it was all about freedom, literally. The Second World War was no mere extension of the First for Australia. It wasn't about our emerging place in the world or our national identity. Our vital interests were at stake. We were 7 million people, 1 million Australians mobilised. We sent 500,000 overseas. And then we emerged from the war victorious, but inconsolably mourning our 40,000 dead. And the Second World War, over 6 years with 60 million people dead, a person having his or her life extinguished every 3 seconds, changed the world. And it had major consequences for Australia. And so when Ben Chifley announced on the 15th of August 1945 that the Japanese had surrendered, there was celebratory pandemonium in the streets of all of the cities, large and small, throughout Australia. And no one then needed to be convinced of the importance of the freedoms that we enjoy.
See, Brendan, you've been a political leader. This, for Truman, was an extraordinary decision that he had to make. It came, he knew, with great responsibility, but also great consequences.
Well, he did, and you can only imagine the pressures that were on all of our wartime leaders, Alan, but that man made... I know it's debated with hindsight, and from the relative comfort of the modern lives that we lead, there are many who are very critical of the decision that he made to drop the bomb. But given the circumstances he was in at the time, there was every indication that the Japanese would fight to the very last man and woman. I think in the order of 250,000 Japanese civilians were killed in those 2 nuclear bomb attacks. but it's estimated that between 5 and 10 million would have died with a land invasion of Japan, which had been planned for late October 1945.
It's interesting to note the comments by Henry Stimson, who was the Secretary of War to Truman, and this was a further pressure on Truman. He told Truman, and these were his words, quote, "The bomb was so powerful, 15,000 tonnes of dynamite, it could end up destroying the whole world." So Truman, with all of this on his mind, still made that decision unilaterally.
Well, he did make the decision, and that's what electors are leaded for, to exercise judgment in circumstances that we can't possibly imagine. And the character of the man is such that he made that decision. He knew that that potentially was one of the risks of it, but without a doubt, it was the bomb in the end that ended the war and brought the Japanese to surrender.
And Truman's words, he sought, Truman's words, quote, "the maintenance of world peace." And what he said, "I made what I believe to be," quote, "the only possible decision."